Coming up next is Julie Hansen, a virtual presentation expert and founder of the Selling on Video Masterclass. She is the author of Sales Presentations for Dummies and Act Like a Sales Pro, and the soon to be released Look Me in the Eye, using video to build virtual relationships. In addition to career in sales, Julie worked as a professional actor, appearing in numerous commercials, films, and television shows, including HBO's Sex and the City.
Julie, welcome to the show. I'm delighted to finally meet you. We have been planning this for a while. I am really looking forward to our chat.
Thank you. I am also. It's very great to meet you across the miles here.
So, Julie, before we proceed, I would like you to tell a bit about the work that you are doing and introduce yourself to the audience who will be watching this.
Sure. So Julie Hansen, and I am an author of a couple of sales books, Sales Presentations for Dummies and Act Like a Sales Pro. And I've been coaching and training and speaking on sales, mostly presentations, demo skills, a lot of those customer-facing events and how we create more of a memorable experience for our customers that lead to greater sales. And probably for about the past 12, 15 years. And then the last year, more recently, really helping sales teams transition into this virtual environment and how do we create a more near in-person experience virtually to combat this distance between the seller and the buyer.
Sounds great, and I'm quite sure that we'll have a very stimulating discussion as we start addressing what we are calling the elephant in the room, and nobody is really focused or talking about it in the public domain. There are discussions in private domains, in small groups, but nothing in the public domain, which is why we thought we should talk about it. And that's this abysmally low rate of lead to closure in B2B sales. Figures vary between 1.8% to 7.8%, depending upon the geography, depending upon the industry, and so on. But it's still a single digit for most cases. I mean, there are exceptions, there are outliers, but if you look at most of the industries, it's pretty low. I mean, it's as low as 5 or even lesser. What do you think got us here?
Oh gosh, there's so many pieces to that, and I think it certainly starts with the quality of the lead, and that's sort of the baseline. You garbage in, garbage out, right? You can only do so much with what you've got. That's not certainly my area of expertise, but I know there's lots of tools to help make sure you get the most up-to-date list, and it's clean and it's easy to access, and certainly sellers' response to leads, that response time, people expect things right away, so you can't sit on anything anymore. But I think there's a number of things that are in the seller's control that they can manage, that can improve that. And one thing, and this can be part of the company culture, is the way that they respond to leads. And oftentimes companies, they get a lead, and then the BDR or whoever first receives that will often share too much of the solution or try to dive too deep with someone too soon. They'll demo too quickly, and then there's nowhere to go with that lead if they didn't do a good job of making that transition, right? If the buyer feels like they saw a demo, they saw enough, and it really didn't address their needs because the BDR didn't do a good job of discovery, they're not going to come back around for another one. They're going to think, oh, I saw a demo. I don't need to see it again, right? And so those disappear. So I think that's a big problem, just on that, that initial, how do we handle leads? What is just enough information to get someone interested and sort of give them an appetizer of what's possible without, dumping our whole solution on them in that first call or overwhelming them.
So what do you think is leading to this? I mean, of course, expecting the newest member of the team, which is typically the BDR, handling the leads in the first instance could be a problem. the eagerness to set it up for the AE, whichever you look at it, could be a problem. This pressure of meeting quarterly quota could be a problem. What exactly is going on there with the BDR and his trying to dump the information as quickly as he can, hoping that something will stick?
Right. I think all those things contribute to it, and it can vary certainly by company, but all of those factors are often present at the same time, and that creates a lot of pressure in that BDR to, just do the very basic of qualification without really discovering why does this person need a solution, which allows, the AE or the SE to go in and develop a presentation or a demo that's really going to address their specific needs. So it just becomes, too automated, I guess, a process, because they're just the BDR is just trying to check off some boxes and move it forward. So I think taking the time to really understand just how critical that role is and giving them, I guess, the space and the tools and the skills to manage that conversation well is really critical, as opposed to just get this information, move it forward, right?
True, very true. Although you said that it's not part of your expertise, I want to touch upon this marketing supplying leads, which sales says is useless, and so on. And there may be some truth to it, no doubt. I mean, I'm not questioning the premise, but my point is something different, and I want your sort of input in that. Marketing and the sales are not working in two different companies. They're part of the same company. They're both selling the same product. They both are aware of the niche that's getting addressed or the pain that is getting addressed. So why this chasm? I mean, how is it that in this over-communicated society that we live in, two departments in a company can't talk to each other appropriately?
It is quite remarkable, isn't it? We've come a long way in some areas, but not so much in that one. And that's been going on for, since I got into sales many years ago. And, you'd get a presentation from marketing and it's like, I can't say this to a customer. This is not, that's not going to work. And, I think there's that natural disconnect between the people coming up with the ideas and in this perfect world, right? In the perfect world with the perfect customer, yeah, this is going to work great. But we don't operate in a perfect world in sales, right? There's all kinds of variables, and we have to read the person, and their reactions are very different. I think it can be solved by having those people, having marketing more involved in, sitting in on those sales calls, sitting in on those BDR calls, understanding what really takes place and the pressures that person is under, and getting out of that perfect world. Certainly we got to have perhaps a standard approach to calls, but really working in some of those exceptions, and how do we, what is really breaking this down at this process? What is missing here? What is that missing piece that can allow it to move forward a little more smoothly and more likely? So yes, it is a disconnect, and I see that all the time. I just worked with a group yesterday that had, they had these new presentations and they're practicing them, and they're like, I would never say this. Like, my customer would laugh at me. So there's a reality check that needs to take place. And sometimes salespeople are they're just resistant, like, no, I do it this way. And they, marketing, I'm not saying marketing doesn't have great ideas, because they often do, but they need to come together and sort of work through those issues that are hard on the sales end.
Fair enough. And before we move on to the solution side of the discussion, I have one more question for you to sort of ponder about. We are talking about, you mentioned that a lot of lot of it depends upon the quality of the data, quality of the leads, right? And we all know that today we have access to lots and lots of information, right?
Too
So
much. Yes.
so exactly, right? So we have up to the point that we have intent data, which is the big thing today, which sort of pinpoints, oh, these are the 5 people who are actually in the market to buy X. And that data gets shared with 10 vendors, I guess. And then all of them are sort of going to them. Do you think there is a fundamental problem with that approach? Because what's happening is we are conditioning ourselves to enter very late into the buyer's journey. When the buyer is actually sending out intent signals into the ether, he has finished 50, 60, 70% of his journey, which means he has shortlisted 5 vendors he intends to engage with. Because the way modern procurement works, the way vendor development works, that side has developed a lot. Yet we somehow believe that we can enter very late and sort of focus on the low hanging fruits and yet get results, which is we'll be able to convert. Do you see some problem there?
Well, certainly the way you explained it, it sounds problematic. It sounds very, very unlikely scenario. And I agree. I think, that is the case, that, there are multiple vendors going after this same fruit. So to be solely reliant on that is certainly not a recipe for success. But also to recognize that, what are you going to do? You're going to not go after them? I guess you have to have a good balance of understanding, like, okay, these are leads, these are active leads, and we approach those a little differently because we know they are, at this stage in the buying process already, and it's not so much about, creating that base level need, but differentiate ourselves from all the other vendors that are also going after this lead, and still having, of course, that approach to really develop those clients that are earlier in the buying stage. So not putting all our eggs in one basket, as it were.
Sure. So is there something I'm missing out when I'm trying to analyze this problem? Is there something you see which is unique in the sense that you have this feeling that this is where the gap exists, and if we bridge this gap and whatever that gap is, it can dramatically contribute towards improvement of the conversion rate?
Sure. Well, I think, all those things we talked about, improving the relationships between marketing and sales, and good quality of the leads, and not throwing too much at people in that initial conversation are going to make some improvements. I think there's a real opportunity right now in this virtual environment for BDRs or whoever is addressing these leads initially, and the AE, by the time they get that contact, to really establish that connection virtually. Because like you said, if people are, they know what they want at that point and they're just sort of vetting different vendors, you need to establish that relationship. And so understanding how to do that in a virtual environment to really build credibility and connection is a differentiator. And there's a lot of companies that don't invest in giving their people those skills, and I think that's a real problem, because we've got all the technology now, but we're still not connecting in a way that makes the buyer feel like, oh, I feel like this person really gets me, because they're making that good eye contact. They're not doing these sketchy things with their eyes, or I feel like I'm being heard. I feel seen. And if you don't know how to operate in this virtual world, if you don't have a good skill set, you're missing all those little nonverbal signals that make somebody feel like, I could work with this person. I could work with this company. So I think that's a real opportunity that a lot of companies should take advantage of, because the bar is raising on our expectations of that, the quality of those calls. And while the content is certainly important, how we connect with people virtually is a growing area of concern for a lot of companies.
In your experience, the kind of companies that you're working with, and you don't need to name anybody, you don't have to specifically say anything, but do you see what kind of conversion rates are you seeing?
Well, they vary by industry, and certainly they're not always comfortable sharing that level of information. But I do know that, for instance, in technology, the number of deals that go to no decision are roughly about half, right? It goes, from 20% to 80%. Now, those are deals where it's past the lead stage and it's perhaps gone to the AE. So that's a problem if even, if that conversion rate is so low initially, and then the AE gets it, and there's a 50 to 80% chance that goes to no decision. That's a lot of wasted time and
Yeah,
opportunity.
absolutely, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So let's move on. Julie, tell me what you think is the solution. How do we fix this?
Yeah, it's a multi-pronged approach, I'm sure, and you've probably got hundreds of opinions now on your show about this, but I would imagine they all fall into some similar buckets, right? So we talked about the marketing and sales getting on the same team, understanding what each side is up against, and that means sales being a little more open to, okay, I'll try that, right? And not
Sure.
just throwing it out. That's not how I do it. So understanding what we really need to do in that first call. What is the right amount of information? Are we building a relationship at the same time that we're having this call? If the BDR is going to hand that off to somebody, are they going to help transfer that relationship? What does that process look like? Because people don't like to feel handled, if they don't like to feel like they're part of a process. So how do we make it feel more organic and not like, they're just going through checking off a list? So working with, that process and the BDR and the AE on that, I think, is vital.
Right. So, what other challenges do you think and opportunities do you think the virtual world provides? Because one of the big issues was getting a face to face meeting. I mean, buyers are not wanting to meet anymore. They are not taking calls. They're not, I mean, we can still talk about cold calling, we can still talk about cold mailing. The fact is that the efficacy, everything works to a degree. Nothing is zero, but the efficacy is down to 1%, 1.5%, 2% of basically getting through. Forget about the sale. We are not even talking of the sale.
Right.
There was a data which I saw that SDR has to make 106 calls to get one meeting, right? And our response is, okay, let's make robocalls. That's not solving the problem. That's sort of
Right.
getting, you know where I'm coming from. So,
Yes.
what are the problems and the opportunities that this whole shift to the virtual selling, which is your area of expertise, what is it? What is that adding to this conundrum that we are in? Both the plus and the minus.
Yeah. Well, certainly the plus is that, if we didn't have this now, we'd be really, hard pressed. And it's certainly, a customer or prospect is more likely to feel connected to you if they can see you than if you're just calling on the phone. So if that's at all possible to do that, it's a huge advantage. Now, the fact is, likely your customer may not have their video on, which makes it hard for you to connect with them. So you have to understand the mechanics and the dynamic of talking to a camera and actually seeing someone there and actually making them feel like you see them, even though you can't see them, which is just about as close to acting as you're going to get. and those are skills that I teach, because that's the reality of it. That's sort of where we're headed. the opportunity is also to create more desire early on, get out of that race for those 5 leads that have 100 vendors going after them, and using video to garner some of that interest, to drum up some interest. I think that is really an opportunity right now for sellers who do it well and to embrace that, because while they may not take our calls, if you send a short video that's very specific and personal, you have a much greater opportunity of them opening that video, of them at least watching the first 15 seconds, and perhaps now knowing your name. And so the next time you reach out, they may think, oh yeah, they sent me a video. Maybe that sounded kind of interesting. So that's an area that's going to just explode. There's already a lot more activity with sellers sending out video messaging. And because of that, the quality that buyers are going to expect is going to be higher and higher, right? And if you have a video where you look like you're nervous and you're looking at the screen, or you look like you're talking to, could be talking to anybody, as opposed to really talking to that camera, connecting with that one buyer that you're making this video for, making them feel, like they could have a conversation with you. Those are the ones that are going to stand out and get the return call. So taking advantage of this time where not everybody has embraced that video messaging as a means of outreach, and upping your skills in that area is a real opportunity.
Interesting. I want to dig a little more on this one. You said that make the video message personal, right? And if you're reaching out to someone for the first time, how do you make it personal yet authentic? I mean, we can always look at his LinkedIn profile and say, okay, you like this, you like that, or you wrote this, or you wrote that. And people know basically that's not being personal, that's being smart, trying to, sort of short circuit something and say something which makes sense, but you really don't know me. So
Sure.
As an expert, how do you, when you're reaching out, for example, I want to reach out to you for the first time, and even though I know what you do, and I know about the 2 books that you have written, I know about your association with 3 or 5 companies, how do I make it personal yet authentic?
That's a good question. Yeah. So there's really 2 parts to that. So there's the personal with the messaging. And you're right, we can only be so personal in our messaging. And especially if you're doing a ton of outreach, you can't invest as much time as you'd like into each of those. So just making a little effort, like you said, even if it's finding something on LinkedIn, say, hey, I'm excited to, I reached out to you. I know your company is doing XYZ, just so they know it's not a recording that you've sent to 500 people, right? That sounds personal in some way, adding some nuance. The other part of being personal is, are you personally connecting with that person? Do I turn on your video and feel like you're talking to me? Because you have that quality where you are having a conversation. It doesn't sound like you're reading from a script, right? Hi, Bob, I'm reaching out to you today because we've got, right? Tune out. They get a million of those. But if I use my camera well, and I know how to bridge this virtual gap here, and really talk to that camera like that's Bob, and say, hey, Bob, so I'm really excited to talk to you because I noticed that what your company's doing is really right in line with what we're providing. And so I thought it would be great. Bob's going to look at that and feel like I'm talking to him, even though it's a recording. And that has much bigger impact. And, we see this all the time when you watch a television show or a movie and you see an actor like suddenly talk to you. Have you ever had that experience?
Yeah.
Where the actor, and it's, and it's a skill that they have. They see that person, they see one person in the camera and they're talking to them, and they have, they have that intention that they're just talking to this one person, and skill set that they learn to do that. And so we can do that as well and really differentiate ourselves.
Great. Any other ideas or advice that you have for people to improve their conversion?
One big thing I would add is more is not always better. And I think what often happens is either in that initial stage with the lead where they I think in sales we have this idea, if I just show them a bunch of stuff, they'll get excited. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. So it's much better, you're going to be much more successful if you take a few minutes to understand their hotspots and just show a couple of things that hit those, as opposed to just making assumptions and going too deep. And that's true of every part of the process there on out. Even when you get into that demo after you've done discovery, just stick to the areas that they are trying to solve, and don't put up a whole smorgasbord of ideas, or that's just going to overwhelm people. And it also makes things look complicated, and that prolongs the sales cycle, right? So just being really focused and clear, and always thinking about what am I solving for this customer, and how does what I'm showing or sharing affect that?
That's a great advice. Julie, thank you so much for making time this morning. And I'm really delighted to have this conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.
Absolutely. Very, very interesting and important topic. So great to chat with you about it.
Thank you.